Hello and welcome to this slightly different video to normal. Thank you for subscribing if you subscribed. Because there are over 10,000 subscribers to my channel, YouTube have given me this new button, the community button, and it allows me to do a couple of things. One of the ones I really want to do is a poll here. So I'm going to poll my subscribers. If you're willing to watch the video and answer my question, that'll be really useful to me and I hope to you. So the poll is about the revision guide I'm writing, which is to an inspector calls, and I'm trying to make it as useful as possible to anyone who buys it. And my instinct is to write it in an academic language that will teach you how to write well. Um, but is that the right language that my viewers or my readers would want? So I've taken a very small section, and I'm going to call that section A, which is written in academic language and is 321 words long. Then I've rewritten it entirely as section B with exactly the same ideas, but language which is less academic but easier to understand. But the result of that is it ends up at 474 words. So if you prefer section B, I'm going to end up writing a much longer guide. If you prefer section A, it'll be shorter. But the question is, which version do you prefer? Okay, well, the moment I'm writing about here is just after we discover Sheila has had Eva sacked from her job at Millwards. The inspector plays down Sheila's guilt. If we look logically at the tragedy of Eva's life, getting sacked by Burling was not the worst thing that could have happened to her. In fact, we might suppose that the job at Millwards, a prestigious shop, without manual labour and the noise and danger of the factory, is a considerable step up from working for the Burlings. Losing this job is far more costly, both personally, because she would prefer it to the Burlings' job, and because it led directly to Eva considering prostitution at the palace bar. However, the inspector calls Sheila only partly to blame for Eva's tragedy, just as your father is. Many capitalists and businessmen in the audience would think Burling acted completely properly in getting rid of the ringleaders of the strike. Their wage demands would significantly reduce profits. By equating Sheila's greater fault with her father's action, the inspector is trying to make Burling seem worse to the businessman in his audience. Alternatively, perhaps Burling's actions are much worse. His actions, after all, affect the whole of his workforce, thousands of Evas. Moreover, he had it in his power to actually make all of their lives better by paying more. He had a greater gift, which he chooses not to give. Sheila, in contrast, has no power, and therefore has nothing she can give. She can only take away. For this reason, the inspector does not accuse her of being spiteful, cruel, or thoughtless. These would be criticisms of her character and personality. Instead, he presents her behaviour in terms of the exploitation of power. It's the power you had. To emphasize this socialist point, he hammers home the emotional message that Sheila would like to turn back time. But you can't. It's too late. She's dead. Priestley deliberately gives the inspector these short sentences to emphasize the finality of what he's done. Okay, well, that's the academic language. The disadvantage is I've got loads and loads of ideas packed into a short space, and you might not have followed them all. It would obviously be easier if you're reading this on the page yourself, but bear with me. In section B, the same one, I've rewritten it. However, there's a slight problem because I'm giving this to you second. You're much more likely to pick it as the one you prefer. So I don't mind which you prefer, but bear in mind that you may be pushed that way just because you're getting it a second time. Anyway, here we go with section B. If we look logically at the tragedy of Eva's life, getting sacked by Burling was not the worst thing that could have happened to her. Her job in Millward's is much better than Burling's. Sheila doesn't have manual labour, doesn't have to put up with the incredible noise of the factory, and she doesn't risk being injured by machinery. Losing this job is much worse than being sacked by Burling because Sheila prefers working at Millward. It is also much worse because when she loses her Millward's job, she ends up having to go to the Palace bar with a friend. This is her first step towards prostitution. The inspector calls Sheila only partly to blame for Eva's death. He suggests that she is guilty just as your father is. Many capitalists and businessmen in the audience would think Burling was right to sack Sheila and the other ringleaders of the strike. This is because if he gave in to the strikers' demands, his business would lose a lot of money. By telling Sheila she is only as bad as her father, when we can see her actions were worse, the inspector is trying to make Burling seem cruel. This helps Priestley to persuade the business people in his audience that Burling's way of doing business is worse. But there is another way of looking at this, so that Burling is much worse than Sheila. Yes, when Sheila gets Eva sacked, it is much worse for Eva than being sacked from Burling's. But Burling employs thousands of women and doesn't pay any of them enough wages for them to save money. Therefore, Burling has far more power than Sheila, and he uses it to make the lives of thousands of women miserable. Yes, Sheila has been more cruel to one individual, but unlike her father, she doesn't have the power to improve the lives of thousands of women. Burling does have that power, but refuses to use it. This makes him far worse than his daughter Sheila. This is why the inspector does not accuse her of being spiteful, cruel, or thoughtless. He doesn't want to criticize her personality. Instead, he wants to show the audience that Sheila's actions are not crueler than her father's because she didn't have enough power to damage enough women. The power you had was not enough to hurt more women. This brings us back to Priestley's socialist message. He wants his audience to feel the same emotion as Sheila does. So, when Sheila wants to turn back time and not get Eva sacked, he is very blunt with her. But you can't. It's too late. She's dead. To hammer the message home, Priestley uses these short sentences. They emphasize how Eva's death is final, and there is nothing any of the guilty characters can do about it now. Okay, well, thank you very much for sticking through to the end of the video. That was version B, and B is the one with easier to understand language, I hope. And the first one was version A with the more academic language, the kind that you'd want to reproduce in an exam. So the question is, which would be better for you if you were reading it in the revision guide? Thank you very much. I'll work out how to make a poll now.